Remember fist fights in the previous IJS? I was at a spiritual meal with my friend and he brought up the topic of sin, the aspect of sin I have not heard many people talk about or explain. There are three parts of sin we must deal with. We spoke of a portion of this in the IJS titled, Let's Go Back to the Beginning. When Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, three things happened with them. Number one, they received a guilty record. Number two, they gained a sinful nature because God's spirit was kicked out and the selfish spirit and nature of Satan was received. And number three, because of the sinful nature, their natural activity was to sin. Now Adam and Eve turned back to God. They were forgiven, but the sinful nature remained. King David said in Psalms 51:5, Behold, I was brought forth in a state of iniquity. My mother was sinful who conceived me, and I too am sinful. John 3:6, Romans 5:12, and we're going to look at Ephesians 2:3. We are born with a sinful or carnal mind and carnal flesh, body. Look at this. Paul says this, among these we as well as you once lived and conducted ourselves in the passions of our flesh, our behavior governed by our corrupt and sensual nature, obeying the impulses of the flesh and the thoughts of the mind, our cravings dictated by our senses and our dark imaginings. We were then by nature children of God's wrath and heirs of his indignation like the rest of mankind. Romans 7:23. But I discern in my bodily members, in the sensitive appetites and wills of the flesh, a different law, rule of action, at war against the law of my mind, my reason, and making me a prisoner to the law of sin that dwells in my bodily organs, in the sensitive appetites and wills of the flesh. Did you catch the one part where he says, different law at war against the law of my mind? Well, Paul is talking about the law of sin, selfish nature in his bodily organs, and this is after his conversion. Because Paul said in verse 22, he delights in the law of God in his mind. Only someone converted that has accepted God delights in God's law. So his mind has been converted at this point, but the nature of sin is still in his body. This is why he cries out in verse 24 of Romans 7, O unhappy and pitiable and wretched man that I am, who will release and deliver me from the shackles of this body of death? In the IJS titled The Elevator, we pointed out that sin spoken of in 1 John 3:4, the transgression of the law was as a result of separation from God. The separation from God gave humanity a sinful nature, which then can only sin. Sinful nature sins. When we are converted, we will still have the sinful nature, which is called the old man in Romans 6:6, Ephesians 4:22, Colossians 3:9. This old nature is also called self. See Luke 9:23. When we receive Christ, we become partakers of divine nature. This is a new mind. Christ was born like the first Adam was created, with a Holy Spirit-filled mind and not the carnal mind Adam received after sinning. This is what we are promised when we receive Christ in 2 Peter 1:4, where we are promised the divine nature. This is the new birth reception of the Holy Spirit. This is also called the new creation, 2 Corinthians 5:17. The old nature will try to stay alive and in charge. This is the fight within ourselves. Christ instructs us to deny self and let it be crucified daily. We cannot crucify ourselves. This crucifixion happens when we choose to stay in the presence of Christ and choose his word and will instead of self's will. We learn to depend on Christ, our sinful, weak, wretched self, and realize how wonderful He is versus how undependable, fallible, and sinful or full of sin we are. Matter of fact, the closer we come to Christ, the clearer we'll see how we are not like Him and realize our need for Him. But the more intimate we are with Christ, the more we are in love and appreciate Him, the easier and more delightful it becomes seeing Him winning battles against self in and through us. Christ's life and death took care of all three aspects of sin: the guilt of sin, the power of sin, the presence of sin. Christ died paying the wages of sin. That takes care of the guilt. This gives Christ the right to give us His life by giving us the Holy Spirit, giving us His divine nature to live in us, to battle our sinful nature. Then in His soon coming, Christ will take away the presence of the sin nature in us. This is what 1 Corinthians 15:53 and 54 is trumpeting to us. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when the corruptible or sinful or perishable has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Christ won the victory over sin and wants to give us the victory over all three parts of sin so we can be eternally with Him. I'm just sharing.
IJS sharing.